Yeah, I feel old. Um, 30 years, man. I was reflecting with Marty Mansmith from Sega, and I've been in this industry now for 30 years, and I can see the same people over that period of time, and we reflect back on how young we were then, and how little we knew, and how much we know now that we didn't know then. So yeah, it's been an interesting ride. Yeah, so I was actually I started out in the pizza industry. Helped start a chain of pizza restaurants. My first business when I was 16 with my stepfather. We opened a pizza place when I was in high school, and then went to college, hooked up with a bunch of ex-Domino's guys. We started a chain called Pizza Pronto, and then I moved to Colorado, fell in love with the mountains, and while I was out there, I became a stockbroker, believe it or not. And one of the companies that came into my view while I was a stockbroker was this little startup. It was a blind pool shell company, and they had this idea of building a laser tag system, and I'd never heard of laser tag, and they invited me to play like this really early prototype, and I thought it was interesting. So I started doing research and found this company called Photon, which I'm sure you guys know of, and started digging into Photon. I went to the library. They had these things called libraries with books on shelves back then. And there was this thing called the Encyclopedia of Periodicals, and you could look up old magazine articles, and started doing research on all these articles on Photon. And as I looked at it, I realized it was kind of an unsustainable business because it was so big, expensive, the equipment was heavy, the real estate was expensive, and started thinking about what would make an affordable laser tag system. And so raised a bunch of money from some friends and family, and wound up acquiring this prototype system from this little company that they had because they didn't know what to do with it. And wanted to create a franchise, really, which we didn't do, but that was how we got into it. Yeah, so I want to say it was probably in 1988 or 1989. I was a stockbroker. The market had crashed in 87. The whole landscape had changed. And a client of mine in Texas had called me up and said, hey, I want you to check on this company that I invested in. And it was called NBS1, and it was up in Boulder, Colorado, and I was based in Denver. And I said, sure, I'll go check it out for you, right? So I drove up to Colorado. I talked to this guy, and he said, yeah, we've got this thing. I want you to come and meet me, and I want to show you what we've got. And so he gave me an address. It was very clandestine, right? And he said, wear black. And I'm like, wow, that's weird. Okay, wear black. Are we going to rob a bank? What are we going to do, right? And so I show up at this strip center in Boulder, Colorado, at a place, I think it was called Laser Force. And it was a very, very early crude prototype. And they were using like timing lights from automotive time with flash bulbs in them. And they had the inside of a hard hat with solar cells glued on the hard hat. And you would go in, and they had these cardboard boxes with fluorescent tape and black lights and a fog machine and pumping music. And we would go in there, and we were crawling around on the ground, shooting flashlights at each other, and going back and, resetting your battery. And it was really, really crude, but it was really amazingly fun and super immersive, right? And so I tore through a brand new pair of jeans, crawling around on the ground, and I walked out, and I was like, holy crap, that was like so much fun. And the guy who started the company was Mark Young, and he was like, we want to do this, but we want to professionalize it. And I'm like, all right, well, keep me posted. And so we stayed in touch, and he built a prototype, and he showed me the prototype. And I said, look, how much do you know about starting businesses? Because I'd already done a startup in the restaurant business. And I'm like, I really kind of get this. You need a business plan. And so he hired me to write his business plan. I spent a lot of time at the library doing research on Photon and previous companies. And we wrote a business plan. And then a bunch of stuff happened with this company. It was a small public company, and there was some shareholder dissent and board dissent where they weren't sure they should be starting a laser tag company because that wasn't the intention of the company when they raised the money. And so I negotiated to buy this crude prototype from them for $9,000. So I went to a bunch of friends, and I said, hey, I need to raise some money. I've got this idea. It's laser tag. And they're like, what the hell is laser tag? And so we raised the money, and we bought this prototype from them. And I found a place in Colorado at Funplex, a guy named Bob Chado, who was the inventor, really, of the big indoor family entertainment center. It was 140,000 square feet in Littleton, Colorado. It had bowling and skating, and he had this loft area where he had this thing called bank shot basketball. And bank shot basketball was a cross of basketball and miniature golf. and you'd have backboards with different angles, and you had to throw the ball up, and it was underperforming. And I went to him and I said, we've got this laser tag thing. It would do really well here. Can we work something out? And so he gave us that space. We had to black it out somehow. It was on a loft overlooking a miniature golf course, right? And so we had to sew an 18-foot tall, 36-foot-long curtain out of fire-retardant vinyl on a Singer sewing machine on the living room floor. So my wife at the time, Sharon, was like going with the whole sewing machine for days on end to sew this giant curtain. And we hung the curtain. We had my future sister-in-law was an airbrush artist, and she airbrushed a paint scene on it, a space scene on it, and we cut out a bunch of cardboard and we made barriers and we opened what would become Laser Storm there. And it was like a bonzo success. Like birthday parties, 20 birthday parties a weekend, 2-hour waits to play. The equipment broke every 10 minutes. Like we were literally holding it together with duct tape and bubble gum and crazy glue. I learned to solder on the fly, and we would take all the broken equipment home every night, and we'd go in the basement of the apartment, of the house that we rented, and we'd be up till 5 o'clock in the morning soldering backpacks and battery connectors, and we had no idea what we were doing, and then we'd bring them back the next day and rinse and repeat. But eventually that gave us the confidence that we had a really good retail concept, but we needed to professionalize it somehow. But that was really the early stage, like the very beginning of how it happened. It was like a lot of things, right place, right time, right people, was able to take advantage of an opportunity that we saw, yeah. Yeah, so one night, my partner, Ed Bonus, was running the Colorado, the Funplex location, and he came back and he had a business card from a guy named Andy Halliday. He had a business card from a guy named Andy Newman, and it said, Chairman of the Board, Edison Brothers Stores. And he handed me the card. He said, this guy wants to buy our system. And I'm like, okay. And you could, you touch a business card and you can tell it's money. Like it was made of linen. And so I had no idea. There was no internet at the time, really. And I had no idea who they were. But it said a New York Stock Exchange company. So I went to the library and I looked in Value Line to look up Edison Brothers. And they were a 100-year-old New York Stock Exchange traded company. They were the largest retail operator of stores, of mall stores in the world. And this guy said, we want to open. He was a photon player, card-carrying photon player. He loved laser tag, and he was going to start opening family entertainment centers in malls. And he wanted laser tag. And so he called him up a couple of days later, and he was like, we want to buy one of your systems. And I'm like, knowing how much work we had to do to keep the thing running, there was no way I could sell that to somebody else. And I said, look, I can't sell you what we have. It's not sustainable. It's not serviceable. But we have a design of a new system that we'd like to have manufactured, but we need some capital to do it. And so I could sell you one for $30,000, or I could sell you 10. I could sell you one for $300,000, or I could sell you 10 for $300,000. And so we had a couple of conversations, and he agreed to give us the money to build 10 systems. And so we went to a contract manufacturer in Boulder, Colorado called Rela that was a medical contract manufacturer. And they helped us finish the design and brought ultimately like this is a very compressed version of that story, right? Because each of these stories could go on for hours. But in essence, with Edison Brothers as a partner, we were able to get it manufacturable and serviceable and actually into what we wound up rolling out and selling. And it took about a year, a little longer than we wanted it to take. But and that's how we got there. It was really because of Edison Brothers and their faith and vision in what we could deliver that we were able to bring the product to market. Yeah, so the state of the laser, I don't think there was a laser tag industry. There was Photon. And around that, actually before Photon, or maybe around the right time, there was Worlds of Wonder had created a consumer product called laser tag. And that was a hit product one Christmas. And then it was a terrible tragedy. We're in San Francisco, and I had my clients as a stockbroker in World of Wonder stock. That was the company that invented Teddy Ruxpin, which was the first talking teddy bear. And they were putting computers in toys for the very first time. This is in the late '80s, and there was a tragedy. Actually, I think it was in a schoolyard. I want to say in San Francisco, where a couple of kids were playing laser tag at dusk or at night, and I think it was an old woman kind of saw these, what she thought were prowlers with guns, and called the police. And a police officer came with a shotgun and shot and killed a kid playing laser tag in a schoolyard. And that just took all the steam out of the consumer laser tag market at the time. World of Wonder stock crashed. A lot of my clients lost money. And that was kind of the state of the laser tag business. There was Photon, which had this really big Taj Mahal of laser tag, as I called it, where you had to have like a die-hard battery on your back and a giant helmet and a face mask, and it was just big and heavy and too expensive. And we knew right away, like, this thing needed to be light, and it needed to be affordable, and it needed to be for kids. And our vision was to build a product that kids could play, not adults, because we knew the entertainment market, the arcade market, was really about children. And so, you know, we were there, and then we showed up at the very first IAPA in 1991, and we thought we were going to be the only company there. And during setup, we were walking around, and we saw this thing called Quasar Space Games, or Quasar, I think it was called at the time. And I was like, oh, wow, that looks like it could be laser tag. And so we realized right away we weren't the only company. And they were doing a similar thing in the UK, out of Ireland, but very high-end. Ours was 25,000, theirs was $250,000. And so we realized there was probably room for both of us in the market. And so for the first couple of years, it was kind of us. It was us on the low end, and Quasar or Qzar would have wound up being on the high end, but then eventually a lot of competition came in. I think that the fact that we made it really light and easy and accessible for kids to play was the primary innovation, to be honest with you. One of the ways we did that was in the arena design. So we created these really lightweight modular arenas with a cable grid system. And then we used these plastic panels. I think there's one up here that are made out of corrugated plastic, and we print on them. And then you could set them up in different configurations. So we created a maze, but we also had a dividing line in the arena. And so it was like dodgeball. And so we didn't want the kids running, and we didn't want them running into each other. So we created a kind of a stealth dynamic of dodgeball, but where you'd have to get, as you got closer to the middle, you had to get low to the ground. And we wanted people on their hands and knees playing because they couldn't get hurt if they were on their hands and knees, other than some, skin rashes. And so we feel like we created a high density arena because people wouldn't run. So you could put 12 people in 1,200 square feet, which allowed it to be economically really affordable for an operator. They could put it in a small space versus having a 3,000 square foot space, which a lot of laser tag, needs today. So I feel like the arena design of really compact, tight space, tight combat was a big innovation. We put a lot of money in designing a gun that didn't look like a gun, which was really hard. We wanted it to look like a Star Trek phaser because we didn't, so one of the things a lot of people don't know is Funplex, which was our first location, was a few blocks from Columbine High School. And so we were really, really sensitive to the notion of kids and guns and violence. And so we really wanted to stay away from this kind of violent gun connotation because at the time it was really sensitive. And so we put a lot of money into tooling. That was a big part of the development project. We didn't want it to look like a gun, which is a challenge because there's hundreds of years of ergonomics that say a gun looks like that. And so that was a big thing that we were focused on. And then theming. We were really the first company to do sustainable, replicable theming. So we created our own storylines. We hired science fiction writers to create, Galactic Marauders and Circuit Commandos. And we created characters and stories and movie posters and themed arenas. And then Rand Marlis, who I love. Hopefully you'll see this someday, Rand. From Creative Licensing, was a movie licensing guy. And he came to me at IAPA one year and he said, we've got this thing called Stargate. And we think it would be great laser tag property. And I'm like, we're in. And so we were able to license the movie Stargate, and we created the Stargate and a Stargate laser tag arena, which won Best Product at IAPA. And then following on from that, we licensed X-Men from Marvel, and we created the Danger Room. I think we missed the market on that. We started getting, we tried to compete with Quasar on the high end, and so we started building more elaborate arenas that were more competitive with some of the bigger competition come in the market. I think we left our market behind and didn't stay with our market niche. So that's a message for you entrepreneurs out there is when you get a niche and you get defined your niche, stick with that and don't leave your prime customers behind and try to move into something you don't know how to do because that was one of the lessons that we learned, yeah. I want to say 265 in about 30 countries. And we there was a period of time when after we went public, so we took it public in an IPO on NASDAQ in 1996. And we'd bootstrapped the company up until then. We didn't really raise any money and other than friends and family. And then we needed to really grow. And so we did try to acquire some other companies using the public market the public stock as a currency, and we had a lot of conversations trying to grow international distribution at the time too as a means to grow. We weren't able to pull any of those off, but yeah, we were in 265 locations, I think, at its peak. Yeah, so we knew we were running out of places to put them. Like, we were growing so fast, and we didn't have a recurring revenue stream. That was the other thing. So, we always envisioned this as a franchise, but creating a franchise business is expensive, and the legal fees and everything. And since we were bootstrapping and all the money was going into like growing the company and manufacturing, we never took the time or raised the money to invest in building a franchise with a recurring revenue stream. And so we realized that at some point we were going to run out of places to sell these, and we were waiting for the next great inspiration to happen, which didn't come. And we're like, hey, maybe we can open our own centers. And so a lot of our operators were making good money. And it happens a lot in amusement manufacturing is the manufacturers look at the operators are making the money, and the manufacturers feel like they're struggling. And so we decided to open our own stores. And so we went public and raised, $6 million, I think, in an IPO to start opening our own stores. And that was a lot harder than we thought it was going to be. And, hired people who we thought were like experts at it and professional, but laser tag was new. And I think that transition from a manufacturing business to a retail operations company was just a real core competency shift that we were never able to make the shift. And we burned through a lot of money trying to do it. The stores, some of them we made money, some of them we didn't, but they were really capital intensive. And so we did a deal with Namco where we were co-locating inside their arcades and malls on a percentage rent, and that looked like a really good deal, but it spread us out really thin because they give us like one location here and one location in Florida and one in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and one in San Bernardino, California, and operating a disparate retail network of relatively low volume businesses across the wide nation was really hard to manage. And so we made a lot of just naive execution mistakes along the way that burned capital. And then we were getting ready to do a secondary offering to raise another $12 million. And a couple of weeks before the secondary fundraise, our original underwriter, Laidlaw Equities, went out of business, basically. They just stopped trading the stock, and the stock plummeted, and the secondary evaporated. And at that point, we were really dependent on that second fundraise. So we did a layoff. We tried to conserve cash, but we, already committed to leases and opening stores, and that was really the beginning of the end for us. And so, we had to pull back the business. And then I realized, in a really hard moment, that we had 265 locations that were counting on us, and we couldn't just go out of business. Like, that was not an option. The market had gotten really crowded. There were probably 16 or 18 companies selling laser tag guns at that point. And so the idea of like slogging it out in that competitive market at a point of saturation was not appealing to me personally. And I know there are guys that have done it, like hats off to Jim Kessler and the guys at Zone who have like stuck with that market. And I know they had some really hard, lean years. And I just wasn't up for that. And so what we did is we figured out how can we continue to support them without being in business. So we sold off like technical support to a company, and we sold off manufacturing to a company so they could keep making parts. And we tried to set it up to where there was still support and infrastructure for the operators who had trusted me and us and our team with their money. And that was a big part of it. And I guess that's worked, because just a couple of years ago, I was with IAPA, and Gord Armstrong, I love you, Gord. Thank you for keeping the dream alive. He had a LaserStorm booth. And at the time, I think there were still 65 locations operating, which just blew my mind because I'd shut the company down 20 years earlier. And for the 20 years later, considering all the innovation and all the other companies, for 65 operators to still have stuck with LaserStorm, actually, it means a lot to me. I love you guys. Yeah, and so it was interesting. So when I was at IAP and all these operators were coming by and we were hugging each other and it was a bit of a love fest. And they were showing me some of the features that we had built in the software. Dennis Potts was our head of engineering, and he was a genius, still is, hopefully. Hope you're still around, Dennis. And so some of the innovations that Dennis, our head of engineering, put into the system to this day are still actually, I guess, cutting edge. And I'd moved on to virtual reality and a bunch of other things and stayed on the bleeding edge of the amusement industry and kind of like let laser tag in my background and didn't pay attention to it. And so coming back around to it and seeing the things that had happened and how the operators were talking about, like we were using smart cards, chip-enabled smart cards in 1994 or 1995. And that technology was really bleeding edge, and the ability to assign different point values to different targets and have those enact servos to trigger lighting events. Those were really, really early innovations and having all of that control on a PC was something that was really bleeding edge. And I don't know that we recognized it at the time, but operators have told me 20 years later, some manufacturers are still trying to get caught up to some of those things there. And we never saw ourselves as a technologically innovating company. For us, it was always about the business model. Keep it inexpensive, keep it affordable, keep it safe, let kids play it, theme it out, make it fun. I never would have considered LaserStorm a technical innovator. But looking back on it, it turns out I think we were, and I don't know if we gave ourselves enough credit for it. Yeah. There's been a passionate group of people who have carried on the dream, and I know Gordo has been a great contributor, and he's a massive fan of it, and he's kind of helped keep it alive. And I know there are other people, and a lot of the operators and the licensees that had it have still stayed behind it. And I think there's been a community of LaserStorm players, operators. Some operators have become players, some players have become operators, and they've kept it alive, and it's really become a community story. And it's not about me at all. I kind of put a fork in it and moved on to other things because it was really hard for me to let go of that. I think as any entrepreneur, when you have your first big failure, one of the things that happens, your identity as an entrepreneur gets intertwined with your business. And when the business is no longer there, you lose your identity and you have an identity crisis. And I went into depression for a year or two after that, and it was really hard to recover. So I didn't want to think about it. And so a whole bunch of years went on. I've become a different person, and I've done a lot of reflection, and then coming back and seeing how the community adopted it and kept it alive, to me, was really heartwarming. So, the current state of LaserStorm is a question for the community, not for me. Yeah, the future of laser tag, I've been spent a lot of the time. 1991, when we launched LaserStorm at IAAPA, Andy Halliday and Andy Newman from Edison Brothers basically called me up before the show and said, "Hey, we've got this new product we want to launch, and we can't get space. Will you help us can we have some space in your booth?" Now, they were my biggest customer, so I'm like, of course, whatever you want. And they brought a product called Virtuality, which was the very first VR product in the amusement industry. And we launched that with LaserStorm in 1991 at IAAPA. And then we went on to build laser tag arenas and virtuality arcades in malls in 92, 93, and 94. And so we'd sit back and we'd say, wow, if somebody could combine laser tag and virtual reality, that would be amazing. And then I forgot about that for 20 years. And then in 2015, I went to IAAPA and I saw Zero Latency, which was this little company in Australia that had created this free roam virtual reality concept in a warehouse that was 4,000 square feet. And you put on a backpack and an HMD and you have a gun and you're running around this amazing, fantastical environment, kind of playing laser tag in VR. Now, they didn't like using laser tag because it was kind of old school, and they didn't like that term, but that's what I saw immediately. And so I think that you're going to see more and more, in the short term, more and more free roam laser tag kind of encroach into the VR market until augmented reality becomes a thing. And when augmented reality becomes usable and serviceable with a wide field of view and affordable, you'll probably see augmented reality encroach into laser tag, and those technologies will merge. And then you'll have the ability to have computer-controlled environments that are changing and responding to the player environment. So we're playing against players, we're playing with teams, we're playing against an environment. And I think a lot of the things that we did around around laser tag and wanted to do in arenas, you'll be able to do in software. 30 years is a long time. Like when I started the business, I was in my 20s, like really, young and naive and full of energy. And now I'm old and naive and full of energy. But I think the fact that laser tag became such a big part of the landscape of the amusement industry, and And now being able to watch VR, hopefully doing the same thing and seeing it integrate and being on the early stage of that. Like very rarely do we get the opportunity to be on the very forefront of multiple trends. And I'm really excited about what's the future is going to bring around VR and AR technology into this business. But I think the biggest thing is relationships. Like this business, the amusement industry especially, is really a relationship industry. And the friendships that I've forged over a 30-year career are really, really meaningful and important to me. And when I come back to these shows, that's the thing that's the most exciting about it, is like seeing the people that, like Rich Babbage, for example, at the Colorado Game Exchange was my mentor when I got in the industry in Denver, and he ran the big distributing company in Denver. And and I still see him 25, 30 years later, and we still talk about what's happening. And so like really long-term, strong relationships. And that to me, that's been the most meaningful and memorable thing.